When you wake up in an unfamiliar place, for the first few seconds your consciousness clings desperately to the illusion that you are at home. This ceiling, these shadows from the curtains, this smell, it's all foreign. I lay there, looking at the neat cracks in the white plaster, and felt a wave of despair rising inside. 68 years. 68 years of waking up in my own beds first in my parents' house, then in Harold's and my house on Elm Street in Bellevue. Now I lie in a room with a suite, like a hotel, only it's not so easy to get out. My husband, Harold Cornish, died 5 years ago. A heart attack took him so suddenly that I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and reach for his side of the bed. Our story wasn't special. We met young, married, had 2 children, Ethan and Mary Ann. Harold worked as an inspector at the post office. I worked as a clerk in the district administration. An ordinary life of ordinary people, but it was filled with warmth and respect. We bought our house on Elm Street when the children were 5 and 3 years old. It was the happiest day. It was small, with a white fence and blue shutters, with an apple tree in the yard. Harold spent a month building a swing set for the kids, and I planted rose bushes along the driveway. The kids grew up in that house. There, in the living room, Ethan took his first steps. On the kitchen table, Mary Ann was studying for her final exams. For 4 decades, this house was the center of our universe. After Harold died, it was hard for me. The kids came over, helped with paperwork, insurance, retirement. Mary Ann called every day, but her job as a social worker in Portland didn't allow her to come often. Ethan and his wife Paige, on the other hand, lived just a half hour away from me. Ethan had always been a complicated kid, stubborn, ambitious, knew what he wanted from a young age. Working in insurance made him even more calculating. And Paige? Well, I tried to love her like a daughter, but there was always a wall of polite indifference between us. She worked as a coordinator for a travel agency and was always busy planning other people's trips, but she never took the time to talk to me over a cup of tea. I noticed the first signs that something was wrong with me about a year after Harold's funeral. I'd left the kettle on the stove and forgotten about it. Good thing the automatic kicked in. Then I couldn't remember the code to my bank card, a card I'd used for years. Little things that happen to everyone, but it was like Ethan was just waiting for it. "Mom, you're not coping," he said during one of his visits. "It's natural at your age." At my age, that phrase was the preface to everything my son and daughter-in-law said to me. At your age, you should get more rest. At your age, you shouldn't go shopping by yourself. At your age, you shouldn't live alone. I resisted. I tried to prove that I was doing just fine. When Ethan offered to hire an au pair for me, I flatly refused. I started taking even more care of the house, dusting twice a week, cooking elaborate meals when they came to visit. I signed up for a computer course at the local library to show that I was keeping up with the times. "Dolores, you're not getting any younger," Paige said, smiling deliberately sweetly. "Ethan and I are so anxious when you're alone." "I'm not alone," I countered. "I have neighbors, friends from my church group, a book club. It's not the same as having family people around." She sighed. And then the random visits started. Ethan or Paige started dropping by unannounced, and each time they found something to worry about. One day I dozed off in the afternoon with a book, and Ethan found me asleep. He thought I'd passed out and almost called an ambulance. Another time, Paige found expired milk in my fridge and gave me a lecture on nutrition. "Maybe you should move in with us," Ethan suggested it last spring. "We have a big house with a guest room on the first floor." "Ethan, honey, I appreciate your concern, but I want to live in my own house." "It's too big a house for a single woman," he insisted. "Its upkeep costs money that could be spent on your health, on traveling, on grandchildren after all." Grandchildren. My weakness. Ethan has 2, Liam and Cassidy, ages 18 and 16. Marianne has little Ella, who just turned 10. I adore them all, but I rarely see them, especially Ethan's children, even though they live the closest. There's always a reason, whether it's exams or sports or seeing friends. Naney. Grandma D, Liam, my oldest grandson, said to me once when he stopped by at his father's request to check on me, "You could really move in with your parents or sell the house and buy an apartment in that new senior complex. There's a pool and exercise equipment." I just sighed. Even my grandchildren thought I was a burden. And then something happened that gave Ethan a real edge. I slipped on the wet bathroom floor and sprained my ankle. It wasn't a big deal, but Ethan, who arrived on my call, made a real tragedy out of it. "See, Mom?" he said, while the doctor put a bandage on me. "What if you had broken your hip or hit your head? You could have lain there for hours before anyone would have noticed." After that, their visits became more frequent. They came with prepared food, insisted on taking me to the doctors, even for a simple eye exam. Paige started accidentally finding bills I forgot to pay, or medications I supposedly wasn't taking correctly. One day, Ethan arrived with some paperwork. "Mom, I talked to a lawyer. You need to get a power of attorney in case you become incapacitated. If something happens to you, we need to be able to make decisions about your care and finances." "There's nothing wrong with me," I objected. "For now, yes, but we're talking about the future. It's just a precaution." I signed it. It was probably my biggest mistake, but at the time, I thought I was just making things easier for my kids. And then, 2 weeks ago, they came by with the news. "Mom, we found a great place for you." Paige was beaming. "It's called Pine Heights. It's not just a nursing home, it's a resort for people of elegant age." "I'm not moving anywhere," I cut her off. "We'll just take a tour," Ethan persuaded me. "You'll just see it. Harry's mom from my office lives there, and she loves it." I agreed to the tour to get them off my back. Pine Heights was located a half hour from Bellevue, in a picturesque setting surrounded by, indeed, pine trees. A modern 3-story building with large windows and well-maintained grounds. We were greeted in the lobby by a smiling woman named Joanna, the new resident coordinator. "Mrs. Cornish, we are so glad you decided to join our family," she exclaimed as she shook my hand. "I'm just here to look," I clarified, giving Ethan a wary glance. "Of course you did." Joanna nodded, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. She saw people like me dozens of times a month, the stubborn old people the kids bring in just to see. We were led around the grounds, a common living room with a TV and fireplace, a dining room with restaurant service, a library, even a small gym with exercise equipment for the elderly. The rooms were really not bad, bright with private baths, some even with small balconies. "Here's your room, Mrs. Cornish," Joanna said, opening the door on the second floor. "My room?" I looked at my son in confusion. "Ethan." "Surprise, Mom," he smiled. "Paige and I decided to give you a present. The first month of your stay here is already paid for." I froze, not believing my ears. "This isn't a field trip," I said slowly. You're going to leave me here?" "Mom, don't be so dramatic," Paige said. "We've discussed everything with the director. The facilities here are excellent, with round-the-clock medical care and a cultural program. You'll love it." "I'm not staying," I said firmly, heading for the exit. "Let's go home right now." Ethan blocked my way, taking me gently by the shoulders. "Mom, listen to me. Paige and I have been planning this trip to Europe for a long time. 3 weeks. We can't leave you alone for that long." "I've done fine on my own for the last 5 years," I exclaimed. "You've fallen, forgotten to take your medication, left the stove on," Ethan listed. "It's dangerous. Here you will be taken care of." "Besides," Paige added, "we've already put an ad on your house. The rent will help pay for your stay. That was a low blow. They were taking over my house without my knowledge. You don't have the right, I whispered, feeling my legs shake. Actually, we do, Ethan said softly. Remember the power of attorney you signed? There was a clause about the right to dispose of your property in case of need. Joanna tactfully walked out, leaving us alone. I sank down on the bed, which was now apparently mine. It's temporary, Mom. Ethan sat down next to me. While you get used to it. If you don't like it, we'll discuss everything when we get back from Europe. When are you leaving? I asked in a muffled voice. Tomorrow morning, Paige said. We brought your things. She pointed to 2 suitcases against the wall. Just the essentials. If you need anything, the staff will contact us. They left an hour later, promising to call. Paige even hugged me goodbye, the first time she'd hugged me in years. Ethan looked guilty, but determined. It's what's best for everyone, Mom. It really was. When the door closed behind them, I didn't cry. There were no tears. There was an emptiness and a feeling of being betrayed by the people closest to me. I stood at the window and watched their car pull out of the parking lot. My son and his wife were leaving for Europe, leaving me in a strange place among strangers without even asking me what I wanted. There was a quiet knock at the door. Mrs. Cornish? A young woman in a nurse's uniform came in. My name is Lauren. Dinner's in half an hour. Do you need help unpacking? I shook my head. No, thank you. Yeah, I can do it myself. When she left, I opened the suitcase. Paige had packed my clothes practical, nondescript. A few framed photos. My wedding photo with Harold, pictures of my kids and grandkids, my favorite cup, a Bible, none of my favorite books, none of the trinkets that filled my house. It's what's best for everyone, Ethan said. But I knew for sure that everyone wasn't me. Everyone was Ethan and Paige, who were finally rid of the burden of an aging mother and in possession of a valuable house in a nice neighborhood. I lay down on my bed, unpacked, and closed my eyes. The first night of my new life at Pine Heights was beginning, a place my son called a new home, but which to me was nothing more than a beautiful prison. Mornings at Pine Heights began at 7 o'clock, a soft knock on the door and the friendly voice of the day nurse. Good morning, Mrs. Cornish. It's time to get up. Though kind, it was the first reminder. I was no longer mistress of my own time. At home, I could wake up at 6 and garden while it was still warm, or lie around until 9 with a book if I wanted to. Here the schedule was inexorable. Rise at 7, breakfast at 8, treatments and classes from 9 to 12, lunch at 1 o'clock, and so on day after day. For the first week I hardly left my room. I sat by the window, looking at the pine trees and thinking about my house on Elm Street. I remembered how my bedroom looked in the morning light, how the lilacs smelled under the kitchen window, how the third step on the stairs creaked. The staff was polite but insistent. They brought me food to my room, but hinted that socializing was an important part of living in their community. Mrs. Cornish, they're showing classic movies from the 50s in the lounge today, said social coordinator Brenda, peeking in on me on the third day. Roman Holiday with Audrey Hepburn. Don't you love Audrey? Thank you, but I think I'll stay here. As you wish, she smiled, but her eyes said, another stubborn old woman. I wasn't stubborn. I was crushed by my son's betrayal. Every time I opened my eyes in that strange room, I felt something inside me snap. 40 years I'd lived in the house that Harold and I had turned into a real nest. And now Ethan had just yanked me out of it like a weed from a bed and transplanted me into the sterile, featureless soil of Pine Heights. My room was neat and functional, a small bedroom with a single bed, closet, and nightstand, a tiny kitchenette with a microwave and mini fridge, and a bathroom with handrails near the toilet and in the shower. Everything is practical. Everything is safe. Everything is a reminder that you are no longer coping on your own. On the walls are faceless reproductions of landscapes, not a single personal item, except for the ones Ethan and Paige had brought in 2 suitcases. On the 8th day, I went out into the common living room. It was a spacious room with couches, armchairs, and a large television. A few older people were watching the day's news. Someone was playing cards at a table by the window, and 2 women were knitting, talking quietly. I sat down in a vacant chair, feeling like a stranger at this celebration of old age. "New girl?" came a voice from my left. I turned and saw a woman about my age, with short gray hair and unexpectedly bright blue eyes behind the glasses. "Yes," I nodded. "Dolores Cornish. Vanity Ballard." She held out a dry but firm hand. "Third week here, still getting used to it." "I'm not sure I want to get used to it," I answered honestly. Vanity hummed. "Dolores? Sadness in Spanish, if I'm not mistaken. I'd never really thought about it." 35 years as a librarian in Bellevue," she explained. "Names are interesting. You know what the worst thing about this place is?" She nodded at the window, which overlooked the Pine Tops grounds. "There's no real library here, just pathetic shelves of detectives and love stories." I smiled involuntarily. There was something refreshingly honest about this straightforward woman. "What library did you work in?" I asked. "I used to frequent the Bellevue Main Library, but I don't remember you." "College library, history department." "Why are you here?" I pressed my lips together. "My son thought I'd be better off here, especially while he and his wife are in Europe." "I understand." Vanity nodded. "My niece also took care of me after I broke my hip last winter. Said she couldn't risk leaving me alone in a 2-story house." We exchanged understanding glances, and in that moment, an invisible thread of camaraderie stretched between us. Vanity turned out to be exactly the person I needed. She didn't feel sorry for herself or let others feel sorry for her. Thanks to her, I did start leaving the room, first to the library, then to the cafeteria, then to the senior yoga class. Not because I wanted to, but because I was tired of my own discouragement. The dining room at Pine Peaks was like the cafeteria of an expensive sanatorium, bright with round tables for 4 well-trained waiters and a changing menu. The food was decent, though dietary. Little salt, little sugar, little flavor. The first day I went down there with Vanity, she confidently led me to a table where a man was already seated. "Dolores, this is Alvin Price," she introduced me. The only man here I could talk to about anything other than sickness and grandchildren. Alvin was a stately man of about 75, with a neat gray beard and thoughtful brown eyes. He rose as we approached and dignifiedly pulled back the chairs for us. "A pleasure, Mrs. Cornish," he said with a slight Southern accent. Vanity had mentioned a new neighbor. "Just Dolores, please." "Just Alvin, then." He smiled, and wrinkles rayed from his eyes. Over lunch, I learned that Alvin had been an accountant, working for a large company, specializing in tax planning. Widowed 10 years ago, no children. Moved to Pine Heights of his own volition 2 years ago, when arthritis got in the way of his ability to maintain a large house. "And you have no regrets?" I asked. "Sometimes," he shrugged. "But I'm a practical man. Everything I need is here, and it's less hassle." From that day on, the 3 of us began to dine together. Vanity and Alvin knew everyone in Pine Tops and were eager to fill me in. Who was friends with whom? Who was feuding with whom? Who had been a big shot in a past life? And who was just rich? Gradually, I began to distinguish faces, memorize names, nod to acquaintances in the corridors. But it didn't get any easier. Ethan called 3 days after my coming out. His voice was cheerful, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Mom, how are you? You settled in?" Like I had a choice. I answered dryly. "Don't start, please." We discussed that this was best for everyone. Everyone but me. He sighed. Mom, give this place a chance. It's a beautiful nursing home. It has everything you need. Meet people, try new activities. When are you going back? I asked, unresponsive to his exhortations. 2.5 weeks. We just flew to London. Then it will be Paris, Rome, Barcelona. His voice sounded excited. Paige had always dreamed of Europe. I see, I said. Have a good vacation. Mom. I pressed off and stared at the phone for a while. They were enjoying Europe while I sat here in this sterile room, cut off from everything I loved. For the next few days, I spent the next few days gathering information, not on purpose, just listening to conversations, asking the right questions. Vanity, with her librarian's meticulousness, was a treasure trove of information about Pine Heights and its routines. Alvin, with his financial background, easily explained complex economic issues to me. How much does it cost to stay here? I asked him over lunch one day. Depends on the package, he shrugged. The basic one is about $3,000 a month, but with additional medical care, it can go up to 5 or 6,000. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. That's, that's a lot. What did you think, Charity? Vanity grinned. My niece is paying from my own pension and savings. Good thing I've been saving all my life. My son said he's renting out my house to pay for my stay here, I said slowly. Alvin tilted his head. What neighborhood in Bellevue is your house in? Elm Street, not far from downtown. He whistled. If it's a decent house, rent there might be 3 or 4,000 a month. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 15 acres, I listed. All 5 then. Alvin nodded. It's a nice neighborhood, and prices have been going up for the last few years. I wondered. Ethan had talked about renting, but what if I sold it? Alvin shrugged. Depends on the condition of the house. But in that neighborhood, it could go for $1 million if it was well maintained. $1 million. The number sounded unreal. Harold and I had bought this house 40 years ago for $80,000, and we'd been paying the mortgage for almost 20 years. And now it's worth $1 million? Is something wrong, Dolores? Vanity asked, noticing my pensive expression. Just thinking. I shook my head. Do you know who's the receptionist here? I need to call a couple places. The next day, I went to Pine Peak's small computer lab. Vanity showed me how to use the internet. I knew the basics, but she was clearly more experienced. We found our county's website with real estate and tax information, and there I saw it. My house was listed for sale, not for rent. The price was $1,100,000. Liar, Vanity muttered, looking at the screen over my shoulder. Your son had you fooled. I felt a wave of anger rising inside. Ethan wasn't just sending me to a nursing home. He was going to sell the house I'd lived in most of my life, the house filled with memories of Harold, of the kids, of all our family history. I need to check one more thing, I said, and Vanity and I went to my bank's website. I tried to log into my account, but the password wasn't working. He changed the password, I guessed. He has power of attorney. He could have done it. Then we need to call the bank directly, Vanity said firmly. Do you have their number? We called my bank from my cell phone. After verifying my identity, I asked about the status of my accounts. Mrs. Cornish, the employee replied politely, there were changes made to your accounts last month. They are now managed by Ethan Cornish under a power of attorney. If you want information, you need to contact him. But it's my money. I was outraged. I understand your concern, ma'am, but everything is legally correct. Your son has provided all the necessary documents. After the call, I sat staring into space. Ethan hadn't just put me in a nursing home and was selling my house. He was in complete control of my finances, all of my savings, my pension, Harold's insurance. It was all in his hands, and it didn't look like he was going to share any of the information with me. Dolores, Alvin said quietly as he joined us in the computer lab. I certainly don't want to interfere in family matters, but this seems like financial abuse. Abuse? I interjected. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon. He nodded. Kids get power of attorney from their elderly parents and then misuse it. Sometimes they spend the money on themselves. Sometimes they sell their parents' property without their knowledge. What should I do? I asked helplessly. You need a lawyer, Vanity said firmly. A good lawyer who specializes in the rights of the elderly. I don't have money for a lawyer, I grinned bitterly. Ethan controls all my money. You know, Alvin said thoughtfully, there's a guy who works here, a nurse named Gabe. He's in law school, and he works here part-time in the evenings. Maybe he can give you some advice. Gabe Trumbull turned out to be a nice young man of about 25, with intelligent eyes and perpetually disheveled brown hair. He worked at Pine Heights in the evenings and on weekends, paying his way through law school. When Alvin introduced me and briefly explained the situation, Gabe immediately offered to help. Mrs. Cornish, this is a serious situation, he said as we retreated to the staff lounge. But there are ways to protect your rights. A power of attorney can be challenged, especially if there's evidence of coercion or fraud. I signed it voluntarily, I sighed. I just didn't read the details. That doesn't mean you gave your son the right to control your life. Gabe shook his head. Look, I know a good lawyer who specializes in this kind of thing. Audra Minsky. She often takes elderly people on Bono or deferred payment cases. Bono? For free, for social reasons, he explained. I can contact her on your behalf. Do you really think she'll help? I asked doubtfully. I'm sure she'll at least listen to you. Gabe nodded. One more thing, Mrs. Cornish. Maybe you should let your son know that you know what he's up to. Not directly, just a hint that you're not as helpless as he thinks you are. I've been thinking. Ethan and Paige are in Europe right now, enjoying a vacation on my dime, selling my house behind my back. They think I've resigned myself to sitting quietly here in Pine Heights while they run my life. You know what? I said, straightening up. I'm going to send him a message, something that will make him anxious. What kind of message? Vanity asked with interest when I turned back to her and Alvin. I pulled out my phone and opened the messages. I've rewritten the inheritance to, and nothing more. Let her think I was up to something. Brutal, Alvin nodded approvingly. I like it. Do you think he'll bite? Vanity asked. If I know anything about my son, he'll panic, I said firmly, pressing send. In the meantime, we'll talk to this Audra Minsky and figure out how I can take back control of my life. I stared at my phone screen at the message I'd sent, and I felt a long-forgotten feeling ignite inside, determination. I wasn't going to give up without a fight. Ethan wanted to get rid of me by putting me in a golden cage and selling off everything I cared about. Well, it was time to show him that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but you shouldn't write him off. The morning after sending the cryptic text message to Ethan started with an unexpected phone call. I'd just finished breakfast when my phone rang and Gabe Trumbull's name popped up on the screen. Mrs. Cornish, good morning. His voice sounded brisk and businesslike. I have some good news. Attorney Audra Minsky has agreed to meet with you this afternoon. I've already arranged with the administration to meet in the visitors' room. So soon? I was surprised. That's wonderful, Gabe. Thank you. You're welcome. Ms. Minsky specializes in these kinds of cases and understands that time is playing against us, especially if your son is actively trying to sell the house. I hung up the phone and felt the warmth of hope spill inside. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could regain control of my life. I dressed and combed my hair carefully for the appointment and even put on a little makeup. I wanted to look focused and determined, not like a helpless old woman. In the visitor's room, Audra Minsky was already waiting for me. a short, slender woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and confident movements. Her dark hair was gathered into a neat bun, and her strict suit emphasized professionalism. Mrs. Cornish, she shook my hand firmly. Nice to meet you. Gabe told me briefly about your situation, but I'd like to hear it from you. I detailed the whole story, how Ethan and Paige had gradually convinced me that I couldn't live on my own, how they'd forced me to sign a power of attorney, how they'd tricked me into Pine Heights, and now they were trying to sell my house. Audra listened intently, making occasional notes in her notebook. What you describe is unfortunately a fairly typical case of elder financial abuse, she said when I finished. Close relatives take advantage of the trust and dependency of their older family members, but we have a good chance of putting things right. Really? I looked at her hopefully, but I signed the power of attorney. The power of attorney authorizes you to act on your behalf, but not against your interests, Audra said firmly. Your son should have consulted you before making important decisions, especially decisions like selling the house. Besides, you can always revoke the power of attorney if you're competent, and you obviously are. She pulled some documents out of her briefcase. I need your signature on the application to revoke power of attorney and on the power of attorney for me as your attorney in fact. Please read these carefully before signing. I slowly studied each document. Audra patiently explained the legal terms and answered all my questions. It was so different from the way Ethan had rushed me through signing that ill-fated power of attorney. What now? I asked when all the papers were signed. Now I will file these documents with the court and request an emergency hearing, Audra answered. I will also send a notice to your bank to revoke the power of attorney. That will temporarily block your son's ability to handle your accounts. And, of course, I'll apply for a stay on the sale of the house. She asked me a few questions about my health, medications I was taking, any diagnosed cognitive impairments. I answered honestly that other than a little forgetfulness and arthritis, I had no major problems. This is important, Audra explained, because your son may claim that you are incapacitated and unable to make decisions for yourself. We may need a medical report to confirm your mental health. When the meeting was over, I felt a surge of energy. Something was finally happening. I told Alvin and Vanity, who were waiting for me in the common living room. She seems very competent, Vanity nodded approvingly. If anyone can put your son in his place, it's her. The key is to act fast, Alvin added, before your house is sold. That evening, Audra sent word that the paperwork had been filed with the court and the bank. Now waiting for a reaction, she wrote. The reaction didn't take long, but it came from Ethan. The next morning he called, and his voice sounded strained. Mom, what does your message mean? Who did you rewrite the inheritance to? I felt grim satisfaction. He'd taken the bait. Ah, Ethan, I said nonchalantly. How was Europe? Enjoying your vacation? Mom, don't go off topic. What kind of message did you send me? What text? I decided to pretend to be distracted. Oh, you mean the one about me rewriting my inheritance? Yes, I thought I'd put things in order. To who? He sounded a little panicked. Mom, you can't just... Why not? I interrupted. It's my money, my house. Speaking of the house, how's the sale going? Or have you decided to rent it out, like you told me in the beginning? There was a pause. I could almost see Ethan frantically thinking of what to say. We're looking at different options, he finally said. The market is very unstable right now, but that has nothing to do with your message. Who did you sign over the inheritance to, Mom? You know, I said, I don't think I should talk on the phone. Come and we'll discuss everything in person. You know we're in Europe, he exclaimed. We can't just fly in. Why not? You could easily just pick me up and put me in a nursing home, and just take and put my house on the market without my knowledge. When Ethan spoke again, his voice sounded wary. How do you know about the sale? I have my sources, I replied cryptically. And by the way, I can't talk anymore. I have a meeting with my lawyer. A lawyer? Now there was genuine concern in his voice. Why do you need a lawyer? Business, Ethan, business. You're the one who always said you should keep your papers in order. So I decided to take your advice. Mom, wait. Sorry, I have to go, I said and pressed off. The phone immediately rang again, but I didn't answer it. Then a message came through. Mom, please call me back. We need to talk. I showed the phone to Vanity, who was sitting next to me. He's hooked, she grinned. Now he's going to be on the edge of his seat. An hour later, another text came in from Ethan. We're changing tickets. We leave tomorrow. We'll be there in 2 days. Please don't make any rash moves. It worked, I nodded satisfied, showing the message to my friends. The main thing now is not to let him outplay you when he gets back, Alvin warned. He'll try to convince you that he was acting in your best interest. Meanwhile, the case was picking up steam. Audra reported that the bank had accepted the notice of revocation of power of attorney and temporarily blocked Ethan's access to my accounts until the court ruled. A motion had also been filed to stop the sale of the house. A court hearing was scheduled for the following week. The next 2 days passed in anxious anticipation. I called Audra several times to discuss the details of the upcoming hearing. She had amassed an impressive amount of evidence that Ethan wasn't acting in my best interest. Bank statements showed that after receiving the power of attorney, he had transferred a substantial amount of money from my account to his personal account, ostensibly to pay for my stay at Pine Heights, but the amount was far more than was required. In addition, Audra found inconsistencies in the paperwork for the sale of the house. Your signature is on the sales application, she said, but it looks suspicious. Do you have samples of your signature on other documents? I sent her pictures of several bills and letters I'd signed recently. A few hours later, Audra called back. I showed these signatures to the expert, she said. He thinks the signatures on the house sale documents are probably forged. That's a very serious charge, Mrs. Cornish. Forging a signature is a felony. A felony? I was shocked. But does that mean that Ethan could, go to jail? Theoretically, yes, Audra answered cautiously. But in practice, in such family cases, the court often prefers to limit itself to financial penalties, especially if it's a first offense. However, you need to decide how far you are willing to go. Do you want your son to face criminal charges? Despite all the pain and anger, I didn't want to see Ethan behind bars. He was my son, and somewhere deep down, I still loved him. But I also realized that without serious consequences, he might not realize the gravity of his actions. Let's start by focusing on getting my finances and house back, I decided. As for the criminal charges, I'll think about that later. Finally, the day of Ethan's return arrived. He sent me a text to tell me that he and Paige had landed and were going straight to Pine Heights. I prepared for this meeting like a battle. I dressed carefully, combed my hair, mentally repeated everything I wanted to say. They showed up after lunch, Ethan, tense and pale, with circles under his eyes from the long flight, and Paige, clearly annoyed that their vacation had been interrupted. I met them in the visitor's room where I'd spoken to Audra earlier. Mom, Ethan started as soon as the door closed behind them. What's going on? What kind of games are you playing? Games? I raised an eyebrow. What games, Ethan? I'm just protecting my interests. Isn't that what you've been teaching me all this time? You sent me a strange message about the inheritance, he continued. Then something about a lawyer, and I got a notice from the bank that the power of attorney was revoked. Do you realize that without the power of attorney, I can't pay for your stay here? Don't worry about that, I replied calmly. I'm not going to stay at Pine Heights anymore. What? Paige exclaimed. But where are you gonna go? Home, I said simply. To my house on Elm Street, which, by the way, you put up for sale without my knowledge, Ethan. Ethan turned even paler. Where did you? I have friends, I interrupted, and they helped me find out the truth. You forged my signature on the deed to the house. You transferred money from my accounts to your own. You put me in a nursing home against my will by lying about your intentions. Mom, that's not true, Ethan exclaimed. I was acting in your best interest. You can no longer live alone. You need care. Um, don't lie to me anymore. I raised my hand, stopping him. My lawyer has all the evidence. The court will hear my case next week, and I'm sure the decision will be in my favor. Court? Paige looked at Ethan in horror. You didn't tell me it went to trial? I just found out. He snapped at her. Mom, you can't be serious about the trial. We're a family. Family problems are solved within the family. That's exactly what I thought, I nodded, until I found out that my own son was cheating on me, stealing my money and trying to sell my house behind my back. Ethan lowered his eyes. Paige was nervously rubbing the strap of her expensive bag. Look, Mom, Ethan started again, softer. Let's talk like adults. I admit that I may have acted too hastily with the sale of the house, but understand, I wanted to provide you with a comfortable old age. What about my opinion? I asked. Weren't you interested in what I wanted? You would never have agreed to sell the house, he sighed. You're too emotionally attached to it. But from a practical point of view, practically speaking, it's my house, and I should decide its fate. I cut him off. In the evening, Audra called with good news. The real estate agency had taken your house off the market after we'd been notified, she said, and the bank has fully restored your access to your accounts. I can pick you up tomorrow morning, help with the formalities of the Pine Heights checkout, and drive you home. I hardly slept that night, packing and thinking about what lay ahead. I knew that coming home wouldn't solve all the problems. My relationship with Ethan would likely never be the same again. But I felt like I was doing the right thing, protecting my independence and dignity. In the morning, as promised, Audra arrived. Together we went through the formalities of discharge. The administration of Pine Peaks was surprised by my sudden decision, but did not obstruct me especially after Audra showed me the official documents that restored my financial independence. Vanity and Alvin walked me to the door. Don't forget us, Vanity said, hugging me tightly. Call and let us know how you're doing. I will, I promised. And you come and visit me. I have a big house. There's enough room for everyone. Ethan Cornish drummed his fingers nervously on the steering wheel, staring at the front entrance of Pine Peaks. Paige sat next to him, idly flipping through the news feed on her phone. This is crazy, Ethan repeated for the umpteenth time. Mom just couldn't have organized all this on her own. Someone is clearly influencing her. Why don't we just go in and find out what's going on? Paige got off the phone. We've been in the car for 20 minutes. Their return from Europe had been rushed and nervous. After that strange message from his mother and the phone call that followed, Ethan hadn't been at ease. It cost a fortune to cancel the tickets that had been booked months ago and buy new ones for the next flight. Ethan spent the 10 hours on the plane agonizing over what could have happened. What if she really had signed everything over to some schmuck from that nursing home? He asked Paige. You know how easy it is to manipulate the elderly. Paige just rolled her eyes. Your mother's not that naive. And anyway, how do you envision this scenario? Hello, I'm Nurse John. Give me your entire fortune. It's not funny, Ethan snapped at her. I just don't understand how she knew about the sale of the house. And that mention of a lawyer? Who could connect her with a lawyer? Maybe she's just bluffing, Paige suggested. She's trying to scare you into coming back. And bluffing about the power of attorney? Ethan shook his head. No, something wasn't right here. They'd driven straight from the airport to Pine Heights without stopping home, and now they were sitting in the car, hesitating to get in. All right, let's go. Ethan finally decided. The sooner we figure it out, the better. The glass doors of the pine tops opened welcomingly in front of them. Inside, everything was the same as the day they had left Dolores here. A bright, spacious lobby, pleasant music, polite staff. Good afternoon, Ethan addressed the receptionist behind the counter. We are here to see Dolores Cornish, room 212. A young woman with a name tag Lisa smiled and tapped on the keyboard. Cornish, Cornish. She frowned. Oh, I see. Mrs. Cornish checked out this morning. Checked out? Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. That can't be. Where? I'm afraid I don't have that information. Lisa shrugged. The formalities had been completed. Miss Minsky had picked her up, introducing herself as Mrs. Cornish's confidant. Minsky? Ethan looked back at Paige. Who's Minsky? Her attorney, Lisa answered. She presented all the necessary documents. If you are close relatives of Mrs. Cornish, perhaps you should contact her directly. Ethan pulled out his cell phone and dialed his mother's number. It was ringing, but no one answered. She's not picking up, he gritted his teeth. Can I speak to someone in management? This is some kind of misunderstanding. After 10 minutes of waiting, the deputy director of Pine Peaks, a full-figured middle-aged woman with a tired look, came out to them. Mr. and Mrs. Cornish? She held out her hand. Janet Ferraro, what can I do for you? My mother, Dolores Cornish, was registered with you, Ethan began. We just found out she checked out. There's been some kind of mistake. My mother can't live on her own. That's why we put her here. Janet pressed her lips together. Mr. Cornish, Mrs. Dolores Cornish, voluntarily checked out this morning. She had an attorney with her who presented paperwork to revoke the power of attorney previously granted to you. They also had a medical report stating that Mrs. Cornish is fully competent to make her own decisions. This is absurd, Ethan exclaimed. Who signed this report? Dr. Rivera, our staff therapist, answered Janet. And I must say that your mother has not shown any signs of cognitive impairment or incapacity during her stay here. So you just let an elderly woman go off with some stranger? Paige intervened. That's professional negligence. Mrs. Cornish, Janet replied coldly, we are not a prison. Our residents have the right to leave the facility as long as they are competent and have paid their bills. Your mother-in-law met both criteria. Moreover, she paused, it is my understanding that it was you and your husband who placed her here without her full consent. If anyone was negligent, then… I understand. Ethan cut her off. Do you have any contacts for this lawyer? Minsky, right? Audra Minsky, nodded Janet. But I'm not at liberty to give out her contact information. I'm sure you can find her on your own or contact your mother. Leaving the pine tops, Ethan immediately went to his phone to look for information about Audra Minsky. She turned out to be a well-known lawyer in Bellevue, specializing in the protection of the rights of the elderly. Her office was in the center of the city. Let's go to my mother, Ethan decided. I'm sure she's home. And if she isn't, Paige asked, shouldn't we call the bank first, check on her accounts? Ethan nodded and dialed the bank's number. After a few minutes of identity verification, he heard what he'd been afraid to hear. Mr. Cornish, the bank teller informed him, your power of attorney to manage Mrs. Dolores Cornish's accounts was revoked yesterday. You no longer have access to those accounts. How is that possible? Ethan exclaimed. I'm her son. Kinship does not automatically give you the right to manage someone else's finances, sir, the clerk explained patiently. For that you need a power of attorney, and yours has been revoked. Ethan hung up the phone and stared blankly for a few seconds. It's too bad, he said at last. Mom revoked the power of attorney. We no longer have access to her accounts. What now? Paige looked terrified. We've spent so much money on tickets, on vacations. I know. Ethan started the car. We're going to her house. We need to figure this out. It took about half an hour to get to Dolores's house. Ethan was gloomy the whole time, and Paige was quietly panicking. What if she really had rewritten the inheritance? She asked. We were counting on that money, on the house. Now was not the time to think about that. Ethan cut her off. We need to understand what's going on first. When they pulled up to the house on Elm Street, Ethan noticed that the for sale sign had disappeared from the lawn. In its place was the old private property sign. An unfamiliar car was parked in the driveway. I guess it's really here, Ethan muttered as he parked at the curb. I saw them through the living room window. Ethan's car parked in front of the house, something clenched inside. It's one thing to prepare a trap, and quite another to watch your own son step into it. But I knew I had to be firm. There was too much at stake. Ethan, Paige, I nodded, opening the door. Come on in. There was a surprise in the living room. At the table sat the elegant Audra Minsky in her usual austere suit, and in the armchairs by the window were two uniformed police officers, Sergeant Morris and Officer Chen. Their presence gave me confidence. What's going on? Ethan stopped on the threshold. There was a flash of fear in his eyes. Mom, why are the police here? Sit down. I pointed to the couch, trying to speak calmly. We need to talk. They lowered themselves onto the couch uncertainly. Paige looked like she was ready to jump up and run away at any moment. Audra opened the file folder. Minus Mr. Cornish, Mrs. Cornish. She began in her professional tone. I represent Mrs. Dolores Cornish. We have reason to believe that you have committed a number of acts that could be considered financial abuse and fraud. What? Ethan jumped up, his face turning red. What fraud? I'm taking care of my mother. Sit down, Sergeant, Morris commanded softly, and my son, that self-righteous man, obediently sank back down. We have discovered, continued Audra, going over the papers, that after you received the power of attorney, you transferred the sum of $35,000 from Mrs. Cornish's account to your personal account. This far exceeds the cost of the stay at Pine Heights, which you say you paid for. Yeah, I just put the money away for the future, Ethan mumbled, not looking me in the eye. So that everything would be paid for up front. A year in advance? Audra raised an eyebrow, and I mentally thanked her for that little theatrical pause. Interesting, especially since you booked an expensive vacation in Europe right after that transfer. It's unrelated, Paige interjected, her voice shrill. We have our own money. Of course, Audra nodded. But the more serious problem is that you, Mr. Cornish, filed the papers to sell your mother's house without her knowledge or consent. Moreover, she pulled a piece of paper out of a folder. The documents bear Mrs. Cornish's signature, which in the expert's opinion is a forgery. I watched Ethan's complexion change from purple to pale. For 44 years, I'd known my son every smile, every grimace. Now he had the look of a cornered animal on his face. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Mom gave her verbal consent. No, she didn't. I straightened in my chair. You told me you were going to rent the house, not sell it. And I never signed the sale papers. Officer Chen stepped forward. Minus Mr. Cornish, forging a signature for the purpose of fraud is a serious criminal offense, he said. We're here to take a formal statement from Mrs. Cornish and her attorney. Depending on that testimony, you may face charges. Charges? Paige looked like she was about to faint. But we didn't do anything wrong. We cared about Dolores. Caring doesn't include cheating, forging documents, or embezzling money, Audra replied calmly. But Mrs. Cornish has a suggestion. All eyes were on me. I felt the weight of the moment. I held the fate of my son in my hands, the same boy I'd once taught to walk, the one I'd comforted after the first heartbreak, the one I'd made proud at graduation, the one who betrayed me. Ethan, I don't want you to go to prison, I said, looking him straight in the eye. No matter what, you're my son, so I'm willing to drop the criminal charges on a few conditions. What are they? His voice sounded hoarse, like he was short of breath. First, you will immediately return all the money you transferred from my accounts. Second, you will sign a document admitting that you acted without my consent in attempting to sell the house. Third, you will reimburse me for all costs associated with my stay at Pine Heights and Miss Minsky's legal services. That's, that's a lot of money, Ethan mumbled, and I saw in his eyes what hurt the most. Calculation. Even now he was thinking about money, not our relationship. Less than the value of my house you were trying to sell. I tried to keep my voice firm. And a lot less than your freedom is worth. There was silence in the room. Ethan stared at the floor, Paige nervously fiddling with the strap of her expensive bag, the same one I'd seen in the pictures from their European trip. A trip on my dime. We don't have a choice, Paige finally said. We're in. I speak for myself, Ethan snapped, and in that moment I saw what they really were: not a family, but two selfish people bound together by profit. Mom, I need time to think. This is a big decision. You have 24 hours, Audra said. After that, we'll turn the case over to the prosecutor's office. Okay, Ethan nodded. Yeah, I'll contact you tomorrow, Mom. They got up, getting ready to leave. I looked at my son, at his slumped shoulders, at the wrinkles around his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Suddenly, a wave of sadness came over me, not for myself, but for him, for what he'd become. Ethan, I called out when he was already at the door. I really don't understand how you could do this to me after everything I've done for you. He didn't answer. He took Paige's hand and walked out without looking back. When the door closed behind them, Sergeant Morris shook his head. We've seen them before, he said. They think that if a parent is old, they can do whatever they want with their life and property. Thank you for coming, officers, Audra said. Your presence definitely helped convey the seriousness of the situation. You're welcome, Officer Chen nodded. And Mrs. Cornish, if you do decide to press charges, we're always here to help. After the officers left, I sank heavily into the chair. Now that the need to hold on was gone, I felt squeezed like a lemon. My hands were shaking, and my throat was lumpy. You did brilliantly, Audra said, sitting down next to me. Not everyone could stand so firm in front of their own son. I don't even know if he's my own son anymore, I grinned bitterly. He betrayed me in the most despicable way. Money often changes people, Audra sighed. Especially when it comes to inheritance. I've seen entire families torn apart by it. You know, I looked thoughtfully at the pictures on the mantelpiece. When I sent him that message about the inheritance, I just wanted to scare him, to make him come back. But now I'm really thinking about rewriting the will. That's your right, Audra nodded. And I'd recommend it, no matter how your son's situation turns out. A clear, legally sound will help avoid similar situations in the future. We talked for another hour or so, going over the details of my upcoming meeting with Ethan, should he agree to my terms. When Audra left, I walked around the house, touching familiar objects, inhaling familiar smells. I was home, safe, the mistress of my life again, but the price of this victory was bitter. The realization that my own son saw me only as a source of money, not as a loving mother. In the evening, the phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Marianne from Portland. Mom? Her voice sounded worried. What's going on? I just got a call from Ethan, talking about the police and fraud. I sighed. It was time to tell my daughter the truth and maybe reconsider not only my will, but my entire family relationship. It had been a week since I'd gotten home, a week full of calls, meetings, and conversations, sometimes in high pitched tones, sometimes in tears. My life, which had been flowing smoothly and calmly, now resembled a raging river during the spring floods. Ethan kept his word. He returned the money to my accounts, signed all the documents that Audra had prepared. His eyes showed not remorse, but rather the frustration of a man whose cunning plan had failed. Paige had stopped showing up altogether, saying through Ethan that she was too upset about what was happening. I didn't insist on her visits. The hardest part was explaining the situation to Marianne. She flew in from Portland the day after my conversation with Ethan. My daughter had always been forthright and determined, qualities that helped her in her work as a social worker, but sometimes created difficulties in her personal relationships. I can't believe he did that, she repeated, pacing the living room. Forge your signature? Sell the house? That's a felony. I know, I replied tiredly, but I decided not to press charges. He is my son, after all. And my brother, Marianne nodded. But that doesn't give him the right to steal from his own mother. I always knew Paige was a bad influence on him, but to come to this, I didn't argue. Deep down, I also thought Paige's ambition had played a part, but Ethan bore the brunt of it. It was his choice to put money before his relationship with his mom. What are you going to do next? Marianne asked. Do you need help? Maybe you should move to Portland with me. No, I answered firmly. I'm staying in my house, and as for help, I'm thinking of hiring an au pair to come a few times a week. But no more than that. Marianne stayed with me for 3 days. We talked a lot, sometimes arguing, sometimes just being quiet together. I told her about Vanity and Alvin, about how they had helped me at Pine Heights, about Gabe and his invaluable help with the lawyer, about Audra herself, who handled my case so professionally. You know, Mom, Marianne said before she left, I'm glad you found the strength to fight. A lot of people in your position would have just accepted it. I did too at first, I confessed. I sat in my room and felt sorry for myself. If it hadn't been for my new friends, who knows what would have happened? Shortly after Marianne left, my grandchildren from Ethan, Liam, and Cassidy showed up. They arrived unannounced, embarrassed, and clearly not on their own initiative. Grandma D, Liam, now 18, began. We wanted to see how you were doing. Dad said you two had some kind of misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Is that what he called trying to sell my house without my knowledge? Liam and Cassidy looked at each other. It was obvious they were embarrassed. We didn't know the details, Cassidy, 16, said quietly. Dad only said that you'd come home and that you had a complicated relationship now. I softened. Children are not to blame for their parents' actions. It's okay, I said, hugging them. Your father and I are really not on the best of terms right now, but it has nothing to do with you. You're always welcome in this house. We spent a few hours together. I baked their favorite chocolate chip cookies. We talked about their studies, their future plans. Liam was going to college to be an engineer. Cassidy was into photography. The usual grandmother-grandchild conversation, but I could feel the unspoken tension between us. They knew something serious had happened, but they were afraid to ask. And I didn't want to stigmatize their father in their eyes, no matter what he had done. When they left, I sat in the chair for a long time, looking at the family photos on the mantelpiece. Harold with little Ethan and Marianne on a fishing trip. Our shared photo for our 25th wedding anniversary. Ethan in his graduation gown. Harold and I with newborn Liam. So many memories, so much love, and this is what it came down to. The next day I called Audra and asked her to come over. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to help Ethan with his homework, and I said, I want to change my will. Audra nodded, not the least bit surprised. That's your right. How do you want to dispose of your estate? I took a deep breath. It wasn't an easy decision, but I thought it was the right one. I want the bulk of it, say 60%, to go to charity. There's a fund to help elderly people who have been victims of financial abuse. I want my money to help those who are in a similar situation but have no way to protect themselves. Audra took notes. 30% I want to split between Marianne and my 3 grandchildren, Liam, Cassidy, and Ella, Marianne's daughter. Let it be their personal inheritance, with no right to manage their parents. And the remaining 10%? Audra asked. 5% I would like to leave to Vanity and Alvin. They helped me when I was desperate, and I want to thank them. And the other 5 for Harold's grave and my own funeral. I don't want my kids doing that. And Ethan and Paige? Audra asked cautiously. Nothing, I said firmly. I don't want them to get a dime of my inheritance. It may seem cruel, but they've already tried to take my money in my lifetime. I don't want them celebrating their victory after my death. Audra nodded understandingly and continued writing. We discussed all the details, and she promised to have the documents ready in the next few days. When the new will was signed and probated, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer worried about what would happen to my money and property after my death. Everything was clearly laid out, and no one could dispute it. Marianne called a week later. Ethan told me that you changed your will, she said without preamble. Yes, I answered calmly. But how did he know? I didn't tell him. Your family lawyer, Mr. Donovan. Ethan went to him to find out the status of the inheritance, and he said he was no longer handling your affairs. I sighed. It's a small world, especially in a town like Bellevue. And what about Ethan? He's furious, Marianne answered honestly. He says that he will sue, will challenge the will to prove that you are incapacitated. Let him try, I grinned. Audra had thought of that option. The will is accompanied by a fresh medical report on my full capacity, certified by 3 different doctors, and a videotape of the signing process, where I clearly explained the reasons for my decision. Did you really ruled him out completely? There was doubt in Marianne's voice. Yes, and don't try to change my mind, Marianne. This is my final decision. I'm not going to change your mind, she said after a pause. It's your money, it's your decision. It would destroy the family forever. Ethan will never forgive. It wasn't my refusal to leave him the inheritance that destroyed the family, I said firmly. It was his greed and deceit that destroyed it, and you know that as well as I do. After that conversation, I didn't speak to Ethan for weeks. He tried to call, but I didn't answer. A couple times I saw his car parked in front of the house, but he didn't dare approach. And I was glad he did. I needed time to gather my thoughts, to decide how to move on. I got unexpected support from Vanity and Alvin. They called regularly, inquiring about my affairs. A month after I came home, Alvin suggested we meet. Why don't we have lunch together? He asked on the phone. I know a good restaurant near the center. I agreed, surprised at my decision. After everything that had happened, the last thing I wanted to do was socialize. But Alvin was different, calm, reliable, and I felt safe with him. The restaurant was a small Italian place with red checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. Alvin was waiting for me at the entrance, trim, in a nice suit, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. You look beautiful, he said, handing me the bouquet. Freedom suits you. We spent a wonderful evening talking about everything in the world. Books, traveling, our younger years. Not a word about Pine Heights, not a word about Ethan and his betrayal. Just 2 people enjoying each other's company. After that evening, our meetings became regular. We went to the movies, to the theater, just strolling through the park. Sometimes vanity joined us, but more often it was just the two of us. I couldn't call it a romance. We were both too old for romantic nonsense, but it was a friendship that brought joy to both of us. One day, as we sat in my garden, watching a hummingbird fly to the feeder, Alvin took my hand. "You know, Dolores," he said, "I never thought at my age I'd find someone I wanted to spend time with. After Helen died, I resigned myself to being alone. And then you came along." I squeezed his hand in return. I didn't need to say anything. We understood each other without words. At the beginning of the fall, what I'd feared and expected at the same time happened. Ethan and Paige showed up on my doorstep. I was just working in the garden when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. "Mom," Ethan began, getting out of the car. "We need to talk." I straightened up, shook the earth off my hands. "Come on in," I nodded. "I'll just wash my hands." We settled into the living room. Ethan and Paige on the couch, me in my favorite chair. We were silent for a while. Then Ethan coughed. "Mom, I came to apologize," he said. "What I did was wrong." "Yeah." I gave in to greed, and it almost destroyed our family. I looked at him carefully, trying to see if he was sincere. "Paige and I thought about it a lot," he continued. "We've decided that we need to work things out. We're a family, and we need to support each other." "Dolores," Paige interjected, "I want to apologize too. I supported Ethan in his decisions, and it was a mistake. We realize we hurt you, and we want to make it right." I listened to them apologize, and I felt nothing. No anger, no joy, no relief. Just emptiness. It was like they were talking to strangers I barely knew. "What exactly do you want to fix?" I asked when they were done. Ethan and Paige looked at each other. "We want things to go back to the way they were," Ethan said. "We want you to be a part of our lives again, so that we could visit, bring the kids, so that we could get together for the holidays. It won't be like it used to be," I answered calmly. "Too much has happened, but I'm ready to try to build a new relationship, on my terms." "What terms?" Paige asked cautiously. "First, no talk of money, property, or inheritance. Never. Second, no attempts to control my life. I will live my life as I see fit. Third, respect for my friends and my choices." Ethan nodded slowly. "Those are reasonable terms. And one more thing," I added. "I'm not changing my mind about the will, so if that's why you're here, you don't have to waste your time." Ethan's face twitched, but he quickly pulled himself together. "We're not here for the money, Mom. We really want to make things right." "Then welcome," I said, standing up. "Tea? Coffee?" They stayed with me for about an hour. The conversation was strained, awkward, but it was a start. I didn't know if we'd ever regain any of the trust we'd had before, but I was willing to try. Not for Ethan's sake or Paige's sake, but for the grandchildren, for Marianne's sake, for the memory of Harold, who had always valued family above all else. When they left, I called Alvin. "They came by," I said without preamble. "Ethan and Paige, they apologized, said they wanted to make things right." "And you believed them?" he asked me cautiously. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I gave them a chance. We'll see what happens." "You're an amazing woman, Dolores," Alvin said. "After all they've done, you're still willing to give them a hand." "I'm not sure that's wisdom rather than stupidity," I grinned. "But I don't want to spend the rest of my life in bitterness and resentment. I still have time for joy." And it was true. Despite all the turmoil of the last few months, I felt more alive than I had at any time since Harold's death. I was gardening, seeing friends, planning a little trip to the coast with Alvin and Vanity. I finally tackled that stack of books I'd been putting off for years. I started keeping a journal, writing down my thoughts and feelings. My home became my fortress again, a place where I felt safe. I hired a young woman, Sophie, who came 3 times a week to help with the cleaning and heavy housework. Not because I wasn't coping, but because I could afford that comfort. I didn't know what would happen next with my relationship with Ethan and his family. I didn't know if my friendship with Alvin would grow into something more. I didn't know how many years or months I had left on this earth, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never let anyone else decide for me. My life was mine alone, and I would live it as I saw fit, with pride and dignity, despite all the betrayals and disappointments. After all, as Harold once said, true strength is not in never falling, but in always rising. And I got up, maybe a little battered, but not broken, ready to face each new day with an open heart and a clear head.